All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a new variable in Stata. So to start off, it's actually pretty easy to create new variables, but sometimes it can take a little bit of work to make sure that you're creating the variable that you really want to create. So to start off, the command to create a new variable, or the most common one, is just going to be gen or generate, and either one will work. And so what you can do is you can create a new variable, and you can create it sort of however you want. So like here's something that I'm just calling a new variable, and I'm going to make it missing. And so it's just going to create a new variable where everything is missing. All right, so we're going to drop that. Now you could also create a new variable that is the same as the value of another variable. So let's say that you want this new variable to be identical to total enrollment. So this data set is every public school that was on operation in New Jersey in the 2017-18 school year. So every line in the data set is a different school. So there's 2,519 at that time. So going back to the new variable, so this is a new, something called new variable that is exactly the same as total enrollment. And what we can do is create a descriptives table. And we see that we have, exactly this, the mean is exactly the same. We can also get the, the n, the mean, the standard deviation. We'll see like it's exactly the same as it should be. So that would be if you want to create a variable that is exactly the same as another one. So let's drop that. Now let's say that we want a new variable, and there are many, many different ways that you could create new variables. Think of any time you might use a formula in, say, Excel or something like that. If you want it to be a combination of certain variables, so you can add variables, subtract variables, all kinds of different stuff. But let's say that what we want to do is, let's say that we want to, let's say we're interested in concentrated disadvantage. So let's start with this variable, economically disadvantaged students. So this is the percentage of students at a particular school that are identified as economically disadvantaged. And we see, the mean here is a little under 36%, and the standard deviation of about just under 29. And because of the size of these, and you can't have negative numbers for a percentage of students, so this suggests that the distribution is not normal. So we could look at that distribution and say, oh yeah, there is a lot of skew in this distribution. And so let's say that what we want to do is we just want to split this distribution. So because there's sort of a natural spot here, so around 40-ish, that there's a one group of schools here that has up to around 40, and then that kind of flattens out after 40. So let's say that we want to create a new variable that flags concentrated disadvantage. So these would be schools where there's a very high percentage of students who are flagged as economically or considered economically disadvantaged. So what we can do is we can start by generating a variable here called concentrated economically disadvantaged. And so we have to give it a value. So in this case, I'm going to start with 0. So let's say that we want this concentrated disadvantage variable to take a value of 0 if the school is not a school that has concentrated economic disadvantage, and a value of 1 if the school is a school that faces concentrated economic disadvantage. So we'll start by just coding it as a 0 for everyone. Oops, have to drop that. Start over. So we want to create a new variable called concentrated economic disadvantage, and it has a value of 0. And so if we were to generate some summary statistics, we'd see that it's all 0, which is what we want. But now let's say we want to take those schools that have more than 40% of their students are economically disadvantaged, and we want to flag them or recode them as a 1 for this variable. So what we would do is use this command right here, so replace. So replace is going to replace the value of a cell, And so we'd say we will replace the value of concentrated economic disadvantage, and we want to replace that with a 1 if, so this is our conditional statement, if the percentage of economically disadvantaged students in the school is greater than 40. So that's what this line of code right here does. And then it'll tell us that there were 996 changes made. So that means that there were 996 schools that met this condition here. And so they were coded as a 1. And so what we can do is if we wanted to, we can look at the distribution for the distribution of economically disadvantaged students within that group of schools that are not concentrated disadvantage, at least according to the variable that we just made. And so we'll see, that it runs up to about 40, and then we can look for the group of schools that were, and we'll see that it runs from about 40 to 100. If you wanted to see more precisely, we can run these two descriptive tables and see the schools that were 0, so they're not considered economic concentrated disadvantage, according to this definition that we just made up. That they run from 0 to 40, which is what we wanted. So this is a sort of a check on our work. Same thing down here. If they were coded as being concentrated disadvantage, we see that that value runs from 40.2 up to 100. So this is a way to just check and be confident that the variable did what we want. So you can create all kinds of different things. So like here is where, if we wanted to say get a student-teacher ratio, so we can create something like this that's just total enrollment. So it'd be total student enrollment divided by the teacher count at that particular school. Anything that you would use Excel for, you can do that. And so lastly, this is really handy, especially if you're going to do, say, something like t-tests or something like that. You want to compare groups, and sometimes you have a continuous variable. So let's say, like in this case, we're talking about economically disadvantaged students. That's a continuous variable. But say that we're really interested in something like, of student outcomes in schools where there is concentrated economic disadvantage and schools where there's not. So you would need to create a variable just like this.